Jake Morrison had exactly 3 life goals that Tuesday morning. Finish his gas station burrito without getting food poisoning, avoid eye contact with the alien diplomats who treated him like furniture, and maybe, just maybe, get through one shift without someone asking him to clean up mysterious alien bodily fluids. Simple goals for a simple man with a simple job at humanity's most important military facility. The Galactic Defense Institute was basically the Pentagon, but with more tentacles and significantly worse coffee. Jake had been mopping its gleaming floors for 5 years, invisible to the parade of generals, ambassadors, and various species of highly educated beings who walked past him daily while discussing the fate of the universe. Which was fine by him. The fate of the universe could wait until he figured out what that green stuff was that kept appearing in Bathroom C. The human military response has been frankly disappointing, announced some pompous voice from Conference Room Alpha, as Jake wheeled his bucket past the doorway. Through the glass walls, he could see the usual suspects, a bunch of aliens in fancy uniforms gesturing dramatically at holographic displays, while actual human military officials nodded along like bobbleheads. Jake paused his mopping to take another bite of his burrito. The breakfast burrito was his one daily luxury, a small rebellion against the cafeteria's attempts to serve culturally sensitive interspecies cuisine. He'd tried the Zephyrian algae cakes once. Perhaps the humans simply lack the cognitive capacity for advanced warfare, suggested another alien voice, this one with that distinctive clicking sound that meant it came from someone with mandibles. Jake snorted. Yeah, right. Humans lacked cognitive capacity. These were the same aliens who'd been trying to figure out how to open the supply closet doors for 3 months because they didn't understand the concept of push versus pull. Jake had watched a decorated Centaurian colonel struggle with a door for 20 minutes before finally helping him out. The colonel had thanked him for his innovative approach to barrier navigation. The Zorthak Empire grows stronger each day, continued the first voice, and Jake recognized it now as General Vextar, a purple-scaled reptilian who spoke like he was auditioning for a Shakespearean tragedy. Their war machines advance across 12 systems while we debate strategy. At this rate, they'll reach Earth within the month. Jake's chewing slowed. That was new information, also slightly concerning information. He'd been operating under the assumption that all this impending doom talk was just typical military paranoia, the kind of thing that justified bigger budgets and fancier uniforms. But there was something in Vextar's tone that suggested this wasn't just another Tuesday crisis. What of the human combat records? Asked a third voice, belonging to Ambassador Quillix, a nervous bird-like creature who always looked like he was about to molt from stress. Surely their history shows some promise. Jake leaned closer to the door, pretending to clean an imaginary spot on the floor. This was actually getting interesting, which was saying something considering his usual entertainment was watching aliens figure out how automatic doors worked. Oh, their history is quite impressive, Vextar replied, his voice dripping with sarcasm. Constant warfare, creative destruction, an admirable talent for violence. But their current military? Bureaucratic, slow, predictable. The Zorthak will crush them like insects. Well, that was depressing. Jake straightened up, preparing to move on to his next exciting task of emptying wastebaskets, when he caught sight of the main display screen. It showed a star map with angry red dots spreading across it like some kind of cosmic infection. The red dots were labeled Zorthok-controlled systems, and they were getting uncomfortably close to a small blue dot labeled Earth. So that was a thing. Humanity was apparently about to be enslaved, or destroyed, by some alien empire with a name that sounded like a throat infection. And their best defense was a committee of aliens who thought humans were too stupid to save themselves. Jake took another bite of his burrito, and decided this was definitely above his pay grade. He was a janitor, not a military strategist. His job was to clean up messes, not prevent them. Besides, what was he supposed to do? Walk into that conference room and explain to a bunch of alien generals that they were wrong about humanity? That would go over about as well as his suggestion that they install better ventilation in the Sulfurian delegation quarters. No, Jake Morrison would stick to what he knew, mopping floors, avoiding aliens who sneezed acid, and getting through each day without accidentally starting an intergalactic incident. The universe would have to save itself. However, he pushed his bucket toward the next corridor, whistling softly to himself. Behind him, the voices in Conference Room Alpha continued their debate about humanity's inevitable doom, completely unaware that their janitor had just become the most informed human on Earth about the impending invasion, which was probably not a good sign for humanity's chances. 20 minutes later, Jake was having serious regrets about that gas station burrito. It was doing things to his digestive system that violated several laws of physics and possibly a few intergalactic treaties. He'd made it through the East Wing without incident, but now he was facing his nemesis, the holographic projector in conference room beta that had been flickering for 3 days. The thing was, nobody wanted to fix it. The alien tech support team insisted it was a human origin malfunction, and the human IT department claimed it was incompatible alien hardware. Meanwhile, Jake was the one who had to listen to diplomats complain about the atmospheric disturbances every time the projector sparked and filled the room with what looked like tiny lightning bolts. "Fine," Jake muttered, pulling his maintenance kit from his cart. "I'll fix the stupid thing myself. How hard can it be?" Famous last words, as it turned out. The projector was mounted on the conference table, a sleek silver device covered in buttons that probably weren't meant to be pressed by someone whose technical training consisted of unplug it and plug it back in. But Jake had learned over the years that most alien technology was surprisingly similar to Earth tech. It just had more blinking lights and made weird humming sounds. He started with the basics, checking the power connections, cleaning the dust from the vents, and gently tapping the side with his wrench. The projector responded by emitting a sound like a dying whale and projecting a holographic image of what appeared to be a giant space pickle. "Okay, not great, but at least it's working," Jake said, reaching for what looked like a reset button. Instead, he accidentally pressed 3 buttons at once, including something labeled in alien script that probably meant "do not press" in 17 different languages. The projector exploded to life. Suddenly, the entire room was filled with a 3-dimensional star map, complete with flashing red alerts, tactical readouts, and what appeared to be real-time battle footage from across the galaxy. Jake stumbled backward, knocking over his bucket and sending soapy water cascading across the floor. "Oh, come on," he groaned, trying to figure out which button would turn the thing off. He pressed another button. The display zoomed in on a particular star system, showing detailed troop movements and defensive positions. Another button made the display rotate, giving him a 360-degree view of what looked like a massive space battle. That's when the door burst open. "By the 7 moons of Zephyr," gasped General Vexstar, his reptilian eyes wide with what might have been awe. "The human has accessed the Quantum Strategic Analysis Matrix." Behind him, Ambassador Quillix fluttered into the room, nearly colliding with 2 other alien dignitaries Jake didn't recognize. They all stared at the holographic display with the kind of reverence usually reserved for religious experiences or really good pizza. "I was just trying to fix the projector," Jake said weakly, still holding his wrench. "It was flickering and I thought maybe—" "Brilliant," breathed Vexstar, moving closer to examine the display. "You've bypassed 17 security protocols and accessed classified strategic data that our best analysts couldn't reach. How did you know to target the nexus point in the Gordian system?" Jake looked at the display, which was indeed highlighting something called a nexus point in flashing yellow text. "I pressed some buttons?" "Pressed some buttons," Quillam repeated, his voice filled with wonder. "Such elegant simplicity. He makes it sound effortless." "I really don't know what I'm doing," Jake protested, but his words only seemed to increase their excitement. "Of course you don't," Vexstar said, nodding sagely. "True genius operates on instinct, beyond the limitations of conscious thought. Tell me, human, what do you see when you look at this display?" Jake squinted at the holographic battle map, which, honestly, looked like a 3-dimensional game of space chess designed by someone with a severe headache. Lots of red dots? And the blue dots seem to be losing?" "Yes," Vexstar hissed, his tongue flicking out in what Jake assumed was excitement. "The Zorthak forces are indeed advancing. But you see something else, don't you?" Something we've missed." Jake really didn't want to disappoint them. But he also really didn't want to accidentally start a war. "Well, I mean, if I were cleaning this mess, I'd probably start with the edges and work my way in." The aliens exchanged glances that seemed to carry entire conversations. Quillix's feathers actually ruffled with excitement. "Perimeter containment followed by systematic internal reduction," Vexstar translated. "Fascinating. And how would you clean the central concentration of enemy forces?" Jake was beginning to suspect he'd gotten himself into something way beyond his pay grade, but the aliens were staring at him with such hopeful expressions that he couldn't bear to disappoint them. "I guess you'd need to cut off their supply lines first, like you can't really clean a room if people keep tracking mud through it?" "Supply line interdiction," Quillix whispered. "Why didn't we think of that?" "Because we're not strategic geniuses," Vexter replied, his voice filled with what sounded like genuine respect. Human Morrison, on behalf of the Galactic Defense Council, I formally request that you accept the position of Supreme Human Strategic Advisor. Jake's wrench clattered to the floor. I'm sorry, what now? The position comes with full diplomatic immunity, access to classified materials, and a salary of 50,000 credits per lunar cycle, Vexstar continued. You'll be humanity's official representative to the War Council. But I'm just a janitor, Jake said, his voice climbing toward panic. I clean things. I don't do strategy, or warfare, or whatever this is. Humility? Quillix nodded approvingly. Another mark of true wisdom. Sir, your species' survival may depend on your unique insights. Jake looked around the room at the expectant alien faces, then at the holographic display, still showing the advancing red dots of doom, then at his mop bucket sitting forgotten in a puddle of soapy water. Can I think about it? He asked weakly. Of course, Vexstar said. Take all the time you need. We'll just be here, watching our civilization slowly crumble, while the Zorthak Empire conquers everything we hold dear. Jake had the distinct feeling he'd just been expertly manipulated by a 7-foot-tall space lizard, which was probably not something they covered in the employee handbook. Jake Morrison had officially been Supreme Human Strategic Advisor for exactly 4 hours and 12 minutes, and he was already plotting his escape. The problem was that escaping from a position that technically didn't exist was harder than it sounded, especially when every alien in the facility kept treating him like he was some kind of tactical messiah. Supreme Advisor Morrison? Came the now familiar voice of General Vexstar from behind him. Jake had been trying to sneak back to his janitor's closet to retrieve his lunch, but apparently stealth wasn't one of his newly discovered strategic abilities. Please, just call me Jake, he said, turning around with what he hoped was a confident smile. And I was just, conducting a tactical assessment of our supply infrastructure. Which was technically true. He had been assessing whether his bologna sandwich was still edible after sitting in a closet for 4 hours. Brilliant, Vexstar said, nodding approvingly. I should have known you'd want to personally inspect our logistical vulnerabilities. Your attention to detail is remarkable. Jake blinked. Right, details. I'm very detail-oriented. Indeed, which is why I wanted to discuss your strategic recommendations with you. Ambassador Quillix has been analyzing your supply line theory, and we believe we've identified 17 potential interdiction points in the Zorthak advance. 17. Jake repeated, trying to sound like he knew what an interdiction point was. That's a lot of points. Too many, in your opinion? Vexstar asked, his reptilian features creased with concern. Should we focus on fewer targets? Jake thought about how he approached cleaning the facility. You didn't try to clean everything at once. You prioritized the worst messes first. Well, I usually start with the biggest problems and work my way down. Focus on the really dirty spots first. Prioritization based on strategic value, Vexstar breathed. Of course, we should concentrate our efforts on the most critical supply nodes. He paused, tilting his head. How do you determine which spots are the dirtiest? This was getting dangerously close to actual military strategy, which Jake knew absolutely nothing about. But he did know about cleaning. You look for the places where everything flows through? Like, if there's a hallway that connects to 6 different rooms, you clean that first because it affects everything else. Choke points, Vexstar said, his eyes lighting up. You're suggesting we target strategic choke points in their supply network. Sure, Jake said, having no idea what he'd just agreed to. Choke points. Those are important. That's when Dr. Melanie Foster appeared around the corner, looking like she'd been searching for him. Jake recognized her as one of the human military advisors who'd been politely ignored by the alien command structure for the past several months. She was tall, competent-looking, and currently wearing an expression that suggested she'd figured out exactly what was happening. Supreme Advisor Morrison, she said, her voice carefully neutral. I was wondering if we could have a word about your strategic assessments. Jake felt a flicker of hope. Maybe she could help him explain to the aliens that this was all a terrible misunderstanding. Of course, Dr. Foster. General Vexstar, if you'll excuse us. Naturally, Vexstar said, bowing slightly. I'll have Ambassador Quillix prepare a full briefing on those choke points for your review. As soon as they were out of earshot, Dr. Foster grabbed Jake's arm and pulled him into an empty conference room. Okay, what the hell is going on? She demanded. Yesterday you were mopping floors, and today you're apparently the galaxy's greatest military mind? I accidentally turned on a projector, Jake said miserably, and now they think I'm some kind of strategic genius, but I'm just a janitor who knows how to clean things, and I keep trying to tell them that, but they think I'm being humble. And Slow down, Dr. Foster interrupted. Take a breath. Now, are you telling me that the alien command structure is taking military advice from the building's janitor? Pretty much, yeah. Dr. Foster stared at him for a long moment, then started laughing. Not the good kind of laughter either. The kind that suggested someone was having a minor breakdown. This is perfect. This is absolutely perfect. I've been trying to get them to listen to basic tactical principles for 6 months, and they promote the maintenance staff. I tried to quit, Jake said defensively, but they said humanity's survival depends on my unique insights, and honestly, that seemed like a lot of pressure to put on a guy who was just trying to fix a broken projector. Wait, Dr. Foster said, her expression sharpening. What kind of insights? Jake shrugged. Cleaning stuff, mostly. Like you clean edges first, and you focus on the biggest messes, and you have to cut off the source of dirt, or you'll never get anything clean. Basic maintenance logic. Dr. Foster was quiet for a moment, processing this. Jake, do you realize that everything you just described is actually sound military strategy? Perimeter security, target prioritization, supply line interdiction, these are fundamental tactical concepts. Really? Jake asked, feeling a mix of relief and terror. So I'm not completely incompetent. No, you're not incompetent. You're just approaching warfare like it's a maintenance problem, which, honestly, isn't that far off. She paused. The question is, what do we do about it? We tell them the truth? And watch them go back to ignoring all human strategic input? Jake, I hate to break it to you, but you might be humanity's only voice in that war room. These aliens respect you in a way they've never respected any of us. Jake felt his stomach drop. So you're saying I should keep pretending to be a strategic genius? I'm saying you should keep being exactly what you are, a practical problem solver who isn't impressed by fancy terminology or complicated theories. And maybe, she added with a slight smile, I could help you translate your maintenance wisdom into military jargon. You'd do that? Jake, if the alternative is watching Earth get conquered because the aliens think humans are too stupid to contribute, then yes, I'll help you fake being a strategic mastermind. Jake considered this. On one hand, it was probably the most ridiculous plan in the history of ridiculous plans. On the other hand, he was already in so deep that backing out now would probably result in humanity's extinction. Okay, he said finally. But I want it on record that this is a terrible idea. Noted, Dr. Foster replied. Now let's go save the galaxy with the power of proper floor maintenance. As they walked back toward the command center, Jake couldn't shake the feeling that this was exactly the kind of situation that would make a great story someday, assuming they all survived long enough to tell it. Dr. Foster, he said as they approached the war room. Yeah, if this goes horribly wrong, can I go back to being a janitor? She patted his shoulder sympathetically. Jake, if this goes horribly wrong, there won't be any floors left to clean. Which was somehow not as comforting as he'd hoped it would be. Jake Morrison was starting to think that maybe, just maybe, he could pull this whole fake military genius thing off. After all, it had been 3 days since his promotion and nobody had died yet. Sure, he'd accidentally ordered the evacuation of an entire star system when he meant to ask for more coffee, but Dr. Foster had smoothly reframed it as a strategic population redistribution, and the aliens had praised his forward-thinking approach to civilian safety. He was actually feeling pretty good about things when the alarms started screaming. All command staff to the war room immediately, blared the facility's PA system, in 17 different languages, including what sounded like angry dolphin clicking. This is not a drill. Repeat, this is not a drill. Jake looked up from his bologna sandwich, his 3rd attempt at lunch in as many days, and sighed. I guess this is where things get interesting. When he arrived at the war room, the scene was pure chaos. Alien officers were shouting at each other in languages that sounded like they were designed to break glass. Holographic displays were flashing red warnings everywhere, and Ambassador Quillix was molting so aggressively that the floor was covered in stress feathers. Supreme Advisor Morrison, General Vexter called out, his voice cutting through the noise. Thank the stars you're here. We have a situation. I can see that, Jake replied, trying to project more confidence than he felt. What kind of situation are we talking about? The Zorthak Empire has launched their first wave of attacks, Dr. Foster said, appearing at his elbow with a tablet full of data that looked absolutely terrifying. They've hit 3 of our outer defense stations simultaneously. We're looking at coordinated strikes across multiple sectors. Jake stared at the main display, which showed a real-time map of the galaxy with angry red dots spreading like a rash. Okay, that's not good. Not good? Shrieked a voice from across the room. Jake turned to see Commander Thrix, a spider-like alien with too many eyes and an attitude problem. It's a catastrophe. Our entire defensive perimeter is collapsing. We need immediate reinforcements to sectors 7, 12, and 15. Reinforcements, Jake repeated, trying to buy time while his brain frantically searched for something useful to contribute. Right, and do we have reinforcements? That's what we're trying to determine, Vextra said, his reptilian features tight with stress. Our reserve fleets are scattered across 47 systems. Coordinating a response will take hours we don't have. Jake looked at the display again, noting how the red dots seemed to be spreading in a very specific pattern. It reminded him of something, but he couldn't quite place it. Dr. Foster, can you show me how these attacks are progressing? Like, in order? She tapped her tablet, and the display shifted to show a time-lapse of the Zorthak advance. Jake watched as the red dots appeared in sequence, each one triggering defensive responses that seemed to pull resources away from other areas. Huh, he said, scratching his chin. That's weird. Weird how? Vextar asked, leaning forward with interest. Well, it's like when you have a really stubborn stain on the carpet. You know, the kind that spreads when you try to clean it? You start scrubbing one spot and it just pushes the dirt to 3 other places. The room fell silent. Jake could feel every alien eye in the place focused on him with that familiar mix of confusion and anticipation. You're saying the Zorthak are cleaning us? Quillix asked, his voice barely above a whisper. No, Jake said quickly. I'm saying they're making us clean ourselves. Look at the pattern. They hit 3 spots. We send reinforcements, which leaves holes in our defenses, and then they hit those holes. It's like they're not trying to win territory, they're trying to make us spread ourselves too thin. Dr. Foster was already working on her tablet, running calculations. He's right. The Zorthak aren't holding the positions they've taken. They're attacking, forcing us to respond, then moving on to the next target. It's a resource depletion strategy. So what do we do? Kander Thrix demanded. If we don't reinforce those positions, we lose them entirely. Jake thought about it. In his experience, when someone was trying to spread your attention too thin, the best response was usually to focus on the most important thing and let the less important stuff wait. What happens if we just don't take the bait? Don't take the bait, Vextar repeated. Yeah, like what if instead of chasing them around, we just focused on protecting the stuff that really matters? You know, like when you're cleaning a building and there's a leak in the basement, you don't waste time mopping the water, you fix the leak first. The room erupted in discussion. Half the aliens seemed to think Jake was a genius, while the other half looked like they wanted to have him committed to an asylum. You're suggesting we abandon our outer defenses? Commander Thrix said, her multiple eyes narrowing dangerously. I'm suggesting we stop letting them dictate where we put our resources, Jake replied, surprised by his own confidence. What's the most important thing we need to protect? Earth, Dr. Foster said immediately. And the core systems that support it. Right, so we pull back, consolidate our forces around the stuff that actually matters, and let them waste their energy conquering empty space stations. But the political implications, Quillix began, are less important than not losing the war, Jake interrupted. Look, I know this sounds crazy, but sometimes the best way to deal with a mess is to contain it instead of chasing it around. Set up a perimeter around the important stuff, and let them come to you. That's when the next alarm went off. Incoming transmission from the Zorthak fleet, announced the communications officer, a blob-like creature whose name Jake had never quite caught. They're demanding to speak with our human commander. Jake felt his blood turn to ice. They want to talk to the human commander? Apparently they've been monitoring our communications, Dr. Foster said, her face pale. They know about your promotion. Supreme Advisor Morrison, Vextar said formally. The Zorthak Empire wishes to speak with you directly. Jake looked around the room at the expectant faces, then at the holographic display showing the advancing enemy forces, then at his half-eaten sandwich sitting forgotten on a nearby console. Okay, he said finally. Put them through. The main display flickered, and suddenly Jake was face to face with what appeared to be a very large, very angry insect wearing military decorations. The creature's mandibles clicked menacingly as it spoke. I am War-Geezwolf Krex of the Zortok Empire. You are the human who has been interfering with our conquest strategy. Ah, Jake said eloquently. Yeah, I guess that's me, Jake Morrison. Nice to meet you. You have impressed us with your tactical adaptations, Krex continued. Your species shows more promise than we anticipated. However, your resistance is ultimately futile. We offer you this opportunity to surrender with honor. Jake glanced at Dr. Foster, who was making frantic gestures that he interpreted as, "Don't agree to anything without checking with us first." That's very generous of you, Jake said carefully. But I'm going to have to decline. We're kind of attached to not being conquered. Krek's mandibles clicked faster. Then you will face the full might of the Zorthak war machine. We have already disabled your outer defenses. Your fleets are scattered and ineffective. What could you possibly do to stop us? Jake thought about that for a moment. Then he remembered something his supervisor had told him during his first week on the job. Sometimes the best way to deal with a big problem is to break it down into smaller, manageable pieces. Well, he said, I guess we'll just have to turn it off and turn it back on again. The connection went dead. The room was silent for a long moment. Supreme Advisor, Quillick said hesitantly, what exactly did you mean by turn it off and turn it back on again? Jake looked around the room, realizing that he'd just declared war on an alien empire using IT troubleshooting terminology. I have absolutely no idea, he admitted. But I bet Dr. Foster can help me figure it out. Dr. Foster was already pulling up schematics on her tablet, a thoughtful expression on her face. Actually, Jake, you might be onto something. The Zorthak Empire relies heavily on automated systems and networked communications. If we could somehow disrupt their network coordination... You're talking about shutting down their entire fleet? Vexter asked. I'm talking about making them have to manually reboot everything, Jake said, his confidence returning. Trust me, nobody likes dealing with tech support, even evil alien empires. As the alarms continued to blare and the red dots on the display crept closer to Earth, Jake Morrison realized that he was about to test whether 5 years of fixing broken alien technology had prepared him to break some alien technology in return. It was either going to be the most brilliant military strategy in galactic history or the most expensive tech support call ever made. Either way, it was definitely going to be more interesting than mopping floors. The final battle for Earth was about to begin, and Jake Morrison was hiding in a supply closet, having what he generously called a strategic planning session, but which was actually a full-blown panic attack. I can't do this, he muttered to himself, clutching his maintenance wrench like a security blanket. I fix broken toilets. I don't save civilizations. There's got to be someone more qualified than the guy who once got his mop bucket stuck in an elevator. The closet door burst open, revealing Dr. Foster with her arms full of technical schematics and her hair looking like she'd been electrocuted. Jake, there you are. We've figured out how to implement your turn it off and turn it back on again strategy, but we need you in the command center now. About that, Jake said, not moving from his position wedged between a stack of toilet paper and a broken floor buffer. I may have been slightly exaggerating my confidence about the whole strategy thing. What if I'm wrong? What if this doesn't work? What if I've doomed humanity because I thought warfare was like fixing a printer? Dr. Foster sat down on a box of cleaning supplies, which was probably the most relaxed she'd been in days. Jake, can I tell you something? I've been working in military strategy for 8 years. I have 3 degrees, including a doctorate in tactical systems analysis, and you know what? Your maintenance approach to warfare has been more effective than anything I've seen in my entire career. Really? Really? The alien command structure has been overcomplicating everything for months. They've been trying to fight this war like it's some kind of elaborate chess match, when what they really needed was someone who could look at a broken system and figure out the simplest way to fix it. Jake considered this. So you're saying I'm not completely insane? Oh, you're definitely insane, but you're the right kind of insane for this situation. She stood up and offered him her hand. Come on, time to go save the galaxy with the power of practical problem solving. When they arrived at the command center, Jake was surprised to find that his turn it off and turn it back on again comment had evolved into an actual military operation. The main display showed a detailed schematic of the Zorthak fleet's network architecture, with dozens of red lines connecting their ships in a complex web of communication links. Supreme Advisor Morrison, General Vextar called out, his reptilian features more animated than Jake had ever seen them. Your strategic insight has been extraordinary. Dr. Foster has translated your concept into actionable intelligence. We've identified the Zorthak Empire's central command frequency, Dr. Foster explained, pointing to a pulsing node at the center of the network diagram. All their ships are connected through a single communication hub. If we can overload that hub with enough contradictory signals, the entire fleet will lose coordination, Jake finished, finally starting to understand his own plan. Like when the Wi-Fi goes down and suddenly nobody can access their emails. Exactly. But here's the brilliant part. Dr. Foster continued. We're not just going to shut down their network. We're going to make it reboot constantly. Every time their systems try to restart, we'll hit them with another signal burst. Ambassador Quillix, who had finally stopped molting from stress, fluttered over to Jake with what appeared to be excitement. Supreme Advisor, how did you know that the Zorthak Empire would be vulnerable to this type of attack? Jake opened his mouth to explain that he'd had no idea, that he'd just been making conversation based on his experience with broken alien technology, when the words died in his throat, because suddenly he realized something. I've been fixing their stuff for 5 years, he said slowly. Every time some alien piece of technology breaks down in this facility, I'm the one who has to figure out how to get it working again. And you know what? It's all basically the same. Different species, different designs, but the same fundamental problems. Overheating, network conflicts, power fluctuations. Go on, Vexstar encouraged. The Zorthak Empire isn't special. They're just another group of beings who built complicated technology that's probably held together with the galactic equivalent of duct tape and wishful thinking. And I bet their central command hub is just as vulnerable to basic technical problems as every other piece of alien tech I've ever encountered. The room fell silent as the implications of this sank in. Jake had spent 5 years inadvertently becoming an expert on alien technology vulnerabilities, and now he was about to use that knowledge to win a war. So what do we do? Commander Thrix asked, her multiple eyes focused on Jake with something that might have been respect. Jake thought about every technical problem he'd ever solved, every time he'd had to explain to a frustrated alien why their equipment wasn't working, every moment he'd spent elbow-deep in the guts of some incomprehensible machine trying to find the one loose wire that was causing everything to malfunction. We give them the worst technical support experience of their lives, he said finally. Dr. Foster, can you set up a feedback loop in their communication system? Already working on it, she replied, her fingers flying across her tablet. But we'll need to get close enough to their command ship to establish a direct connection. How close? Jake asked. Close enough to physically access their network port. Jake stared at her. You're talking about someone going onto an enemy ship, in the middle of a battle, to plug something into their computer? That's exactly what I'm talking about. And I suppose you want me to do it. Jake, you're the only person here who knows how to troubleshoot alien technology under pressure. Besides, Dr. Foster added with a grin, you're the supreme human strategic advisor. This is your plan. Jake looked around the command center at the expectant faces of beings from dozens of different species, all of whom had somehow developed absolute faith in his ability to solve problems that were way above his pay grade. Then he looked at the main display, where the red dots representing the Zortak fleet were getting uncomfortably close to Earth. Okay, he said finally, but I'm bringing my toolkit. The next hour was a blur of preparation, briefings, and what Jake generously called strategic planning, but which mostly involved him trying not to throw up while alien engineers explained how he was going to be smuggled onto an enemy warship. The plan was simple in concept. Get Jake close enough to the Zorthak command ship to establish a direct network connection, upload Dr. Foster's feedback virus, and get out before anyone noticed. In practice, it was the kind of plan that would have been rejected by a Hollywood screenwriter for being too ridiculous. Supreme Advisor Morrison, General Vexstar said as Jake was suiting up in what appeared to be a spacesuit designed by someone who had never actually seen a human before. I want you to know that your courage in volunteering for this mission will be remembered throughout galactic history. I didn't volunteer, Jake pointed out. I was volunteered. Even better, Vexstar replied. True heroes never seek glory. 20 minutes later, Jake found himself crammed into a one-person stealth pod that smelled like alien sweat and was apparently held together with the space equivalent of paperclips and hope. Through the tiny porthole, he could see the massive bulk of the Zortak command ship growing larger by the second. Okay, Jake, Dr. Foster's voice crackled through the comm system. You're approaching the docking bay. Remember, you're looking for a maintenance access port. It should be clearly marked. Define clearly marked, Jake muttered, maneuvering the pod through what appeared to be a gap in the ship's hull that was barely wider than his vehicle. It'll probably have some kind of universal symbol indicating network access. Jake scanned the alien corridor he'd just entered, looking for anything that resembled a network port. After 5 years of working with alien technology, he'd learned that universal symbols were about as universal as alien cuisine was edible. Found it, he said finally, spotting what appeared to be a glowing rectangle surrounded by symbols that probably meant something important in whatever language the Zorthak used. Okay, I'm connecting the device now. He pulled out Dr. Foster's custom-built network adapter, which looked like a standard USB cable that had been crossbred with a small octopus. The device slid into the alien port with a satisfying click. "Connection established," Dr. Foss announced. "Uploading the feedback virus now. Jake, you need to keep that connection stable for at least 60 seconds. That's when the alarm started going off. Dr. Foster, I think they've noticed me. Just hold position for 30 more seconds." Jake could hear the sound of approaching footsteps, or at least what he assumed were footsteps. They might have been the sound of alien security forces scuttling down the corridor, or possibly the sound of his own heart trying to escape through his ribcage. 20 seconds. The footsteps were getting closer. Jake pressed himself against the wall, trying to make himself as small as possible, while keeping one hand on the network adapter to ensure it stayed connected. 10 seconds. A shadow appeared at the end of the corridor. Jake held his breath. "Upload complete. Jake, get out of there now." Jake yanked the adapter free and sprinted back toward his pod, which suddenly seemed like it was approximately 17 miles away. Behind him, he could hear the unmistakable sound of angry alien voices discovering that their computer network had just been infected with the galactic equivalent of a really annoying computer virus. He dove into his pod just as the first energy weapon blast scorched the wall where he'd been standing. The tiny craft's engines roared to life, and Jake found himself pressed back into his seat as the pod accelerated away from the Zorthak command ship. "Jake," Dr. Foster's voice came through the comm. "You need to see this." Jake looked out his porthole and saw something beautiful. The entire Zorthak fleet was blinking. Every ship was cycling through what appeared to be a continuous reboot sequence, their lights flickering on and off in a pattern that would have been hypnotic if it weren't so satisfying. "It's working," he breathed. "They're all stuck in a restart loop." "Not just stuck," Dr. Foster replied, her voice filled with something that might have been pride. "Every time their systems try to come back online, the virus triggers another feedback cascade. They're basically experiencing the galaxy's worst technical support nightmare." Jake watched as the mighty Zorthak warfleet, which had been on the verge of conquering Earth just minutes earlier, flailed helplessly in space like a collection of very expensive paperweights. "Dr. Foster," he said, finally allowing himself to smile, "remind me to put defeated evil alien empire with IT troubleshooting skills on my resume." "Jake," she replied, "I think you're going to need a bigger resume." 3 weeks after single-handedly defeating the Zorthak Empire with what the galactic media had dubbed the Great Technical Reboot, Jake Morrison was still trying to convince people he wasn't a strategic mastermind. "Supreme Advisor Morrison," General Vextar announced during what was supposed to be Jake's resignation ceremony. "The Centaurian Republic has requested your assistance with their border conflicts. They're offering you command of their entire fleet." "I don't want command of their fleet," Jake said for the 100th time. "I want to go back to my mop bucket." "Hush," Ambassador Quillix nodded knowingly. "The humble warrior returns to his simple tools, such profound wisdom. The mop as metaphor for cleansing the galaxy of corruption." Jake buried his face in his hands. "It's not a metaphor, it's just a mop." Dr. Foster patted his shoulder sympathetically. "Jake, you've received 17 job offers from different star systems, 3 marriage proposals from alien royalty, and someone wants to name a moon after you. You're famous." "I fixed their Wi-Fi," Jake protested. "That's literally all I did." "You saved civilization," Vextar corrected. "The Zorthak Empire has requested a formal surrender ceremony. They want to meet the tactical genius who defeated them." Jake looked around the command center, where his mop bucket still sat in the corner exactly where he'd left it. The aliens had declared it a strategic artifact and refused to let him use it. His bologna sandwich had been preserved in a museum. "Fine," he said finally, "but I'm bringing my wrench to the ceremony." "Of course," Quillix said reverently. "The sacred implement of universal maintenance." Jake Morrison, reluctant savior of the galaxy, went back to his janitor's closet. He had 15 minutes before his next strategic consultation about bathroom cleaning schedules, which apparently held the key to interstellar diplomacy. At least the pay was better now, and nobody had asked him to clean up mysterious alien bodily fluids in 3 whole weeks. It was progress.